Hello BookTube, and hello AuthorTube. Yesterday I made a writing-related video. Haven't done one of those in a while. I made a writing-related video on the essential writing question. Should you write? And yesterday I tried hard to convince you that the invidious dividing, the dichotomy that I've been dealing with my whole life between creatives and non-creative people is a myth. That in reality it's only practice. That's the only dividing line. It's not that some people can tell stories on paper and others can't. It's that everyone can, but some people try. And keep trying. And I wanted to stress, the point I wanted to stress in yesterday is that the answer to that big question, should you write, is yes, you should. You owe your voice to the world in the same way that you have benefited from the voices of others, whose works you have read. That is an ongoing process. It doesn't stop with you. You're not a sponge. You are morally, ethically, you are compelled to continue it. And that's just morally and ethically. Once you start, once you get into it, once you start to feel what it's like, you'll realize that you're also creatively obliged to do it. And you'll consider it a punishment if you have to stop after a while. But that's the subject for a later video. That was the big question yesterday. Should you write? The answer is yes. The big question today is, should you write now? And in my talking about these subjects with people over the years, over the decades, I have taught writing for a long time. I've talked about these subjects for a lot longer than that. And I don't believe that my argument from yesterday about the real dividing line being between people, not between creatives and non-creatives, but between people who do it, who work at it, who practice, and people who don't. I believe that that argument is pretty much invulnerable. I don't believe, I mean, I'd be happy to do it. I'm just South Boston now to be happy to argue with you about this or any other subject, but I don't believe that my argument there can be defeated. I think it's too easy to see and prove that I'm right. That we all have brains that tell stories, and that we all have the ability to write. The only element that's missing from that is practice. Now, I've had quite a few of you respond. I had quite a few of you email me yesterday and last night and say, well, you're not saying there's no such thing as talent, are you? You're not claiming a universality of outcome here, and I'm not. Absolutely, I'm not. There's no such thing as creative versus non-creative. Of course, there are different levels of creativity. There are different imaginative leaps in the fruitfulness of a person's imagination, the ability to pull together different items from different places and get it all right in terms of instinct and timing and pacing. All of that is a highly individual stew, and there are people who are going to be better at it than not. But that's not the point. We're not talking about some sort of contest here. We're talking about whether or not there's a divide between people who even can do it and people who can't. Not the levels. I wasn't talking about the levels of outcome. And I don't believe that my argument that everyone can do it is really assailable. I think I've trotted it out for a whole number of people, for students, for construction workers, for non-creatives, and also for more than a few authors, including one or two you've probably read. And no one's ever been able to dent it. I think I'm right about this. And if I'm right about that, when I bring it up and people have to concede, the very next stopping point, the very next roadblock that I get from people is, okay, you're right. Okay, you're right. Talent, one way or another, notwithstanding, there is really no such thing as creative versus non-creative. Everyone is creative. I could sit down and write the story that's been rattling around in my head for years. I could do that. Invariably, once they concede that, the very next place they go is to say, I will. As soon as, this arthritis in my hands clears up, as soon as my chemo's done, as soon as the kids go off to college, as soon as I retire, as soon as we move to Florida, as soon as I get that vacation home. And that brings us to today's big question. Not should you write, but should you write now? And the answer to that question is also yes. You should write now. Today. You should write now. Today. All of the excuses that you make for why you can't do that, not 10% of them, not 50%, not even 95%, all of the excuses that you make for why you can't write today are false. All of them are dodges. The sooner you realize that, the better. I have proved myself in pragmatic, ontological ways where someone, countless numbers of people, I've lost count of how many, young people, middle-aged people, old people have said to me some variation on that. As soon as I have the time, I don't have the time, but I really want to. It's just once X obstacle is done, once Y obstacle is done, once Z life problem is cleared up, then I will write. I will finally do it. You're right, I should practice, I should be a creative person, I should give back, considering how much creative productivity I have absorbed in my life. You're right about all of it, it's just now is not the time. Every single time that I have been given the privilege of rooting around in the life of the person who says that to me, every single time without exception, I have found that not to be true. Every single time. I have found not only free time for writing, but vast open territories of free time. Vast territories of free time. That is true in your case, every single one of you. That is true across the board. I have seen this so many times, and I have never known it not to be true. In fact, the one person that I've known in my entire life who heard my original argument about should you write and said, you know, I hadn't thought of it that way, but there really isn't a comeback to that. You're right. I should write. And I will. I can't do it right now because both of my hands are occupied. But right now, as soon as I can, I will. The one person who ever said that to me, that I'm physically constrained, I can't write right now, but I believe you, and I will start writing as soon as this medical procedure is over, was dead that evening. That was the one person who actually had grounds to stand on. The rest of you do not. And I could go to literary history to illustrate this. It would be easy. I'm sure you know some of these stories. No matter how busy you are right now, you're not as busy as Anthony Trollope was. Family adjacent, extended relatives, a full-time job, job-related obligations that took much more than full-time, plenty of social obligations, and yet regularly writing novels. Now, he is a superhuman example of writerly discipline. Always had a novel going, worked every day. I believe we can get to that. But he's still a good example of how he's a good example, especially of how this obligation lands on you. Because we've read quite a few Anthony Trollope novels on this channel and loved them. And we wouldn't have read them if he hadn't written them. And he had more excuses than most people. He had a full-time job. He had money coming in, enough to support a family. He didn't need to do any of it. But it's not just Anthony Trollope, who is, like I mentioned, a superhuman example of discipline. We could also talk about the Bronte sisters. You're saying your life is harder than the Bronte sisters? Are you? Are you really? You saying you have it worse than Anne Frank in the Annex? No. And we read their works. We love their works. Those works mean a lot to us and to millions of other people. And they wouldn't be there if those people had made the excuses that you are and stuck to them. Leave alone the first argument, the question that came up yesterday. The Bronte sisters certainly had no reason to think that there are some people who write and some people who don't, and they're one of the ones who do. Anne Frank never even thought about it. She never even crossed her mind that she didn't have the right to write a story, same as anybody. It just happened to be her story. Take my word for it. And you don't have to, because you can look around your own life honestly and see, but take my word for it, you have time to write. And you have time to start today. Every time you make an excuse of today is not the day, the stars are misaligned, I've got a tummy ache, my mind just isn't in the right place, I don't have my signature blend of tea, whenever you make an excuse like that, you are just furthering a process that you can continue doing forever. And you shouldn't. We've already gone over this. You should write, and you should write today. No more stalling, no more delaying. You should write today. You are surrounded by free time. You are surrounded by ideas, and you are surrounded by not only the freedom to write, but the technology to write. You have paper, pens, screens, all the tools that you need to make prose in a draft, to make prose that you can share with people. You have all of this all just around you. If you read into the details of history and saw all of the thousands and thousands of people who yearned to write and had none of those things, they couldn't do it because they had none of those things. No freedom, no permission, no tools, no education. You're surrounded by those things. You have no excuse not to do it. And every reason too, not just for the obligation that we're talking about, but also because you're going to like it. It's going to fill a hole that you didn't know was there. So the answer to today's question, should I write now, is yes. You should write now. Not only should you write, that was yesterday. Today is, should you write now? And the answer is yes. You should write today. Start today. And if you say, well, okay, you've convinced me. I shouldn't put this off any longer. I've been putting this off too long. But today won't work. I mean, that's obviously metaphorical, right? I need to do a little organizing, maybe buy a bullet journal, maybe get a document open on my computer, or look around on YouTube to rate the different writing programs. And maybe I need some magazines, and maybe there's a writing group at my library that teaches you how to prepare to write. I need to do all that first. You're talking metaphorically. Of course, I'm not. I'm not talking metaphorically. I'm saying start today. Start right now. Plan later. Start writing now. You have already wasted way too much time. So anything of that you do now is just going to encourage you to do more of that. So don't. So don't. Start today. And I'm going to have a couple more writing videos in mind. These are all towards a point. Quite a few of you have already guessed what the point is. You've emailed me. It made me realize this is the defect. This is the dark side of talking with you for 2 hours every day, is that you get to know me inside and out. You get to know the twist and turn of every thought. But one way or another, we'll get to my grand plan in a little while. But today, the question is, should you write now? And the answer is yes. Anything that is coming to your mind right now as you hear me that is a reason not to is false. All of it is false. Put it all aside. Set aside time. I realize if you haven't done this, if you're new to the process, these are going to be new muscles. They're going to be very weak. This is going to be a new routine. It's going to be very wobbly. So I'm not asking you to do 3 hours. But set aside half an hour today. Do it today. Do it right now. And that's your friendly, peaceful, calm, and inviting writing video for today. So I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll be back. We have more writing stuff to talk about, AuthorTube. You went a long time without me. It was so peaceful. I promise. I won't be yelling at you the whole time. We'll talk a little more tomorrow. Thank you, BookTube and AuthorTube.